In the near future, a spaceship with a total of 4 crew members launches to find life on other planets. While the other are in deep sleep, a crew member named George sends a message to Earth. He explains that it has only been 6 months since their launch, but Earth has already aged 700 years. He hopes that humanity has evolved into a better species in those years, and that wars and crimes are over. After that, he prepares himself for cryo-sleep and takes one last look at his crew. Then he enters the cryo chamber and falls asleep. After a year in cryo-sleep, the ship crash lands on an unknown planet in a body of water. The ship wakes up the crew, and the 3 men realize they have grown beards during the time. Next, they check the chamber of the only female crew member, Lieutenant Stewart, and are shocked to see her hatch is cracked, and she is dead. Her body has decayed because it was not sealed in the chamber. But this is not their main concern as the ship is sinking and water is flooding inside. George tries to restart the ship, while a member named John attempts to signal Earth that they have landed. Meanwhile, another member, Dodge, checks if the atmosphere is breathable. George announces that the engine is dead, and John reports that he cannot reach Earth because the power is out. Later, Dodge confirms that the atmosphere is breathable, throws an inflatable raft on the water, and jumps in. George and John quickly gather supplies and abandon the ship. The trio boards the raft and watches as their ship sinks, taking Stewart's body with it. As they navigate through the lake, they try to figure out where they are in the universe, with each having different opinions. They are also confused about how they landed on this planet and why Stewart's hatch was cracked. After that, they reach the shore. Dodge conducts a test on the soil, while George checks their supplies. John marvels at the fact that they have spent more than 2,000 years in space, yet have only aged 18 months. Then, Dodge completes his analysis and reveals that nothing they know can grow here, but there are traces of some organic substances. George reminds them that they have only 72 hours to find life on this planet because that is when their supplies will run out. As they begin their search, John plants an American flag to signal anyone who might come later that they were here. However, George laughs at him, pointing out that they do not even know if their country still exists after so many years. As they walk across the barren land, Dodge discovers a small plant. This ignites hope in the astronauts, making them believe there is life on this planet after all. The group continues their journey, noticing more and more of the plant as they move forward. But unbeknownst to them, a primitive-looking tribe is following them from a distance, watching their every move. Next, the crew stumbles upon scarecrow-like figures nearby and decides to check them out. As they approach, they hear the sound of waterfalls and quickly lose interest in the figures. Then they run toward the waterfall, which is surrounded by a lush green forest. Excited by the discovery, they take off their clothes and start swimming in the water. After having some fun, John notices human-like footsteps on the shore, and the group decides to leave the water. Suddenly, the primitive tribe appears and steals all their belongings, including their clothes, before running off. The crew follows the path left by the tribe and finds their belongings broken and their clothes torn, scattered along the way. As they continue tracking them, they come across a group of mute, primitive humans dressed in rags. These humans are happily raiding a cornfield and gathering food from nearby trees. But soon, all the humans stop eating and freeze in place. Suddenly, a loud roar echoes through the area, and all the humans scatter in panic. Confused, the astronauts run with the humans, unsure of what is happening. Then they are surrounded, and the crew is shocked to see their pursuers. The attackers are uniformed apes, all wielding weapons. The apes use nets to capture the humans, and John is caught along with the others. George hides in the cornfield, while Dodge is shot and killed as he tries to escape. George is eventually discovered, and when he attempts to run, he is shot in the neck. Next, the captured humans are gathered in one place as the apes, now revealed to be capable of speech, take pictures with their captives. George loses consciousness, and when he wakes up, he finds himself receiving a blood transfusion from a woman, administered by an ape doctor. The ape doctor complains to another ape doctor, Zira, expressing his disgust toward humans, whom he refers to as dirty animals. He remarks that he feels more like a veterinarian than a doctor. However, Dr. Zira reminds him that humans are important for studying the function of the cerebrum, as they resemble apes. She then takes a particular interest in George because he was caught wearing strange clothes. George listens to their conversation but remains silent, choosing not to reveal that he understands everything they are saying. Later, the human cages are cleaned with a hose, and Zira visits George. George observes Zira giving treats to well-behaved humans and reflects on how apes and humans seem to have switched roles. George tries to speak, but due to his neck injury, he cannot. Zira is amazed, as this is the first time she has seen a human attempt to speak. Next, a senior doctor named Dr. Zaius arrives. He claims George is only mimicking them, though he cannot hide his surprise at George's actions. However, Zaius refuses to acknowledge that George shows any sign of intelligence, dismissing him as just a human. Zaius, who views humans as inferior, even orders George's execution to be expedited. Later, Zira arranges for the female human to be placed in the same cage as George to observe his behavior. However, George does nothing as the female sniffs him. After that, Zira introduces George to her boyfriend, Dr. Cornelius. George writes something on the ground for them to see, but when Zaius arrives, the female destroys his writing. Frustrated, George pushes her away and fights another man who tries to defend her. Zira watches George's fighting style, but the ape guards intervene, dragging George out of the cage. As Zaius leaves, he notices part of George's writing on the ground, but destroys it. Next, George is returned to his cage. This time, he manages to steal a pen and paper from Zira and writes his name for her. However, a guard named Julius beats him and takes the paper away. Zira is shocked when she sees George's name written on it. Then Zira takes George on a leash to her home. There, George surprises Cornelius with his handwriting and a paper plane toy he makes. Cornelius becomes intrigued as he believes apes might have descended from humans. He shares that he has made some discoveries at archaeological sites that support this theory. However, he is reluctant to discuss it further, as the idea goes against ape teachings, especially those of Zaius, who firmly believes humans are violent creatures. Later, Zaius and a commissioner ape named Maximus arrive, ordering George to be returned to his cage. After that, George learns that the apes plan to execute him. When Julius tries to leash him again, George escapes. Chaos erupts in the ape city as the apes see a rogue human running freely through the streets. After a frantic chase, George is captured and restrained in a net. The apes mock and disrespect him as he struggles. Zira tries to intervene and save George, but the security guards block her. Then, to everyone's shock, George shouts, commanding them not to touch him. Next, George is put in prison, where he names the woman in the cage with him Nova. However, the guards soon come and separate them. After some time, George is taken to a court, where the prosecutor accuses Zira of creating him as a monster. George tries to explain that he is from another planet and traveled many miles to get there, but the court only mocks him. Maximus and the other prosecutors refute everything he says by citing their version of the Bible. George then mentions that there were two other men, John and Dodge, and claims John is still alive somewhere. Zaius and Maximus take him outside, saying all the survivors have been captured and John must be among them. When they go outside, George is thrilled to see that John is indeed alive. However, he soon realizes that the apes have performed brain surgery on John, altering his mind to make him as primitive as the other humans. Furious, George tries to attack Zaius but is quickly restrained. They take him back to the court, where Cornelius defends George. Cornelius explains that he has discovered skeletons and remains of a human civilization in the Forbidden Zone. This revelation enrages the council, as Cornelius has gone beyond the established boundaries. They accuse Cornelius and Zira of malicious mischief and scientific heresy. Later, Zaius brings George to his office and demands to know where he truly came from. Zaius believes George is a mutant and suspects there are more like him somewhere beyond the Forbidden Land. Zaius admits to tampering with John, but George insists that everything he has told the council and Zira is true. George then challenges Zaius, asking why the Forbidden Land exists if there is nothing to hide. This question angers Zaius, and he sends George away. Back in his cell, George waits for his execution. Zira's cousin Lucius secretly comes to the prison and helps George escape. George frees Nova, and the trio heads to the city, where Zira and Cornelius are waiting for them. They hide the humans in a carriage and ride out of the city to safety. After traveling a safe distance, George cuts his leash and arms himself with a weapon. He leads the group to the Forbidden Land, where Cornelius takes them to a cave he explored the previous year. However, before they can enter the cave, Zaius and his men arrive. After exchanging fire, George proposes a deal. He will let them go if he can prove that humans existed before the apes. Zaius agrees and enters the cave with them. Inside, Cornelius shows Zaius a human skeleton from 2,000 years ago, but Zaius dismisses it, claiming the dating methods are inaccurate. Then George finds inorganic teeth, a pair of reading glasses, and an artificial heart valve in another skeleton. Zaius argues that such items could be fabricated. However, George presents a talking doll, something the apes could never have made. Just as Zaius begins to process this, gunshots are heard outside, and they are forced to leave the cave. When they step outside, they see Lucius being attacked by Zaius's men. George shoots one of the apes and takes Zaius hostage. The soldiers immediately stop firing, and George sends Lucius back to the city to bring more supplies and weapons, warning that he will kill Zaius if they do not comply. George then ties Zaius to a log, a scene that visibly unsettles the apes. George demands that Zaius pardon Zira and Cornelius, stating that he has proven their science and beliefs to be true. Next, Zaius asks George why humanity was wiped out. George replies that it could have been a plague or a natural catastrophe. He accuses Zaius of already knowing the truth long before the discovery of the cave. George mocks Zaius for hiding the truth from the apes under the pretense of being the defender of faith. However, Zaius counters by saying that he knows mankind better than any ape ever could. He refers to ancient scripts written by the so-called greatest ape of all, which describe human behavior as greedy, lustful, and above all, destructive. The scripts warn that humans are war-loving creatures who fight their brothers and neighbors, taking their homes and lands. They caution apes to beware of humans, as they bring only destruction. After hearing this, George grows quiet. Soon, Lucius returns with the supplies, and George takes Nova with him to continue his journey, hoping to revive the human race. Zira and Cornelius decide to stay behind with the other apes. George kisses Zira goodbye and asks Zaius why he fears and hates him. Zaius replies that humans, despite their wisdom, are ruled by their emotion. George then asks how humanity truly went extinct. Zaius tells him to find the answer on his own, but warns that he will not like what he discovers. As George and Nova leave, the soldiers attempt to follow, but Zaius stops them. Instead, Zaius orders his men to bring explosives to destroy the cave and erase all evidence of the past civilization. He informs Zira and Cornelius that they will stand trial for heresy and orders Cornelius to be sent away. Zaius claims that he is protecting them from the ways of humans. The apes then blow up the cave, sealing its entrance before leaving the area. Next, George and Nova follow the shoreline and eventually come across the ruins of an old city. George dismounts his horse and is horrified to find himself standing before the ruins of the Statue of Liberty. Realizing the truth, he breaks down in anger and despair as it dawns on him that this planet was, in fact, Earth, destroyed by humankind's own actions. And the movie ends here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out these awesome movie recap videos. Subscribe the Explanation Pro for our upcoming videos.